Can you imagine moving to a quiet town, desperate for a fresh start, only to discover everyone there thinks you're the spitting image of a notorious murderer? That's what happened to me, and it shattered my world in ways I never thought possible. I'd moved to Millbrook to disappear. After the divorce, after losing the house, after my entire life just imploded in ways I still can't fully explain, I craved a place where absolutely no one knew my name. Millbrook seemed perfect. 2 stoplights, 1 grocery store, and rent I could actually afford. A blank slate. But it wasn't. From the moment I picked up my keys, my landlord stared at me, a strange intensity in his eyes. "Have we met before?" he asked. I told him no. I'd never been to Millbrook in my life. He nodded, but his gaze kept returning to my face, like I was a puzzle he just couldn't solve. By the end of my first week, I'd had that same unsettling interaction 15 times. The cashier at the grocery store said, "Oh, you're back," then looked utterly bewildered when I corrected her. The coffee shop owner's hand trembled as she gave me my change. I even saw a group of teenagers cross the street to avoid me, one of them looking back with pure, unadulterated fear. It wasn't just the recognition that unnerved me, it was the reaction to whoever they thought I was. I finally cornered Carl, the hardware store owner. He was in his 70s, more curious than afraid, and he studied my face for a long moment. "You really don't know who you look like?" he asked, his voice low. When I shook my head, he just sighed. "Then it's not my place to tell you." That night, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach, I called my mom. Had we ever visited Millbrook? She'd never even heard of it. But when I mentioned the town to my aunt, the line went dead silent. "Why are you asking about Millbrook?" she finally whispered. "I moved here," I said. She hung up. When I called back, she wouldn't answer. Eventually, a text buzzed. "Get out of that town. Today." I should have listened, but something had taken root in me, a desperate, almost physical need to understand. It felt like a splinter I couldn't stop touching. The next day at the bank, the teller went white when she saw me. She called her manager, who demanded 2 forms of ID while nervously glancing at something taped behind the counter. I caught a glimpse, a grainy photograph. A woman who looked exactly like me. "What is that?" I demanded, but she quickly covered it. "Security protocol." I went to the library. The archives were unavailable, but the librarian leaned close and whispered 2 words before walking away. February 2019. I spent hours searching online, but it was like those words were a secret code. Every link was dead. Every article had been scrubbed clean. Something had been erased from the internet, and I was walking around wearing its face. A week later, I came home to find my apartment door ajar. Nothing was missing, but things had been moved. My photo albums rearranged, my laptop open. Someone was trying to figure out who I was. And frankly, that made 2 of us. Then the dream started. About a house I'd never seen. A room with bright yellow curtains. The acrid smell of smoke. I'd wake up with my heart hammering against my ribs, certain I'd forgotten something vital. The line between what I knew and what I didn't know kept blurring, twisting my reality. And then I found the grave. It was in the old cemetery on the edge of town, adorned with fresh flowers on a recently cleaned stone. But the name had been deliberately scratched off, destroyed. Only the date remained. February 15th, 2019. Behind the headstone, tucked into a weatherproof frame, was a small photograph. I picked it up, and my whole body went cold. It was me. Exactly me. Same face, same eyes, even the small scar above my left eyebrow from a fall when I was 7. But the clothes were unfamiliar. The house in the background, alien. I heard footsteps behind me. Half the town stood at the cemetery entrance, a silent, unmoving crowd. Carl stepped forward, his face unreadable. "We always knew you'd come back," he said softly. My voice shook as I held up the photograph. "That's not me. I've never been here before." "Her name was Eleanor Price," Carl said, his gaze fixed on my face. "She lived here for 3 years, kept to herself, seemed nice enough. Then one night in February, she set fire to the community center during the winter fundraiser. 14 people died. She disappeared before anyone could stop her." I couldn't breathe. I'm not her. I'm not Eleanor. We know. It was the librarian, stepping forward, her voice surprisingly strong. We've been watching you for weeks. Checking your records, your history. You're not her. You just look exactly like her. Then why? I whispered. Because we needed to be sure, Carl answered, his voice tired, not threatening. And because some people in this town will never believe it. They'll always see her face when they look at you. The crowd began to disperse, one by one, until only Carl remained. You should leave, he said, his eyes filled with a weary understanding. Not because we'll hurt you, but because this town will never let you be anyone but her ghost. You'll spend the rest of your life being someone else's nightmare. I left Millbrook the next morning. I didn't look back. But sometimes I still dream about that house with the yellow curtains. Sometimes I wake up and don't recognize my own reflection for just a moment. And sometimes I wonder if identity is something we're born with, or something that gets assigned to us by the people who need us to be a certain thing. I wonder if Eleanor Price, whoever she really was, ever felt the same way. I wonder if that's why she burned it all down. I drove for 6 hours straight, putting highway miles between me and Millbrook until the town felt like something I'd imagined. My hands wouldn't stop shaking on the steering wheel. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I expected to see Carl's tired face, or the cemetery crowd following me. The words kept repeating in my head. Asterisk 14 people died. She set fire to the community center. Asterisk I pulled over twice because my vision blurred, and I couldn't focus on the road. The second time, I sat in a gas station parking lot for 20 minutes, my heart pounding, my breath coming too fast. A woman pumping gas at the next pump stared at me through my window. I started the car and drove again. By the time I crossed into the next state, then the one after that, the sun was setting. My back ached from gripping the wheel so hard. I found a motel on the outskirts of a city big enough that I didn't recognize any of the chain stores. The clerk barely looked at my face when I paid cash for 3 nights. The room smelled like old cigarettes and cleaning chemicals, but nobody here knew about Eleanor Price or February 2019 or a community center fire. I locked the door, checked it twice, then collapsed onto the bed, still wearing my shoes. For 3 days, I didn't leave, except to get food from the delivery driver who knocked and left bags outside my door. I ordered from different restaurants each time, so nobody would notice a pattern. My laptop stayed open on the small desk, search window after search window filling the screen. I typed Eleanor Price into every search engine I could find. Nothing. I tried Eleanor Price Millbrook. The results showed a dentist in California and a high school teacher in Maine. Neither of them the right person. I searched February 2019 Fire Community Center. Articles popped up about fires in other states, other towns, other years. Nothing about Millbrook. I tried adding different words. Arson, 14 victims, winter fundraiser. Every combination led nowhere. The internet had been scrubbed clean, like Eleanor never existed at all. I switched to archived news sites, the kind that store old articles and public records. I searched by date range, by location, by keywords. Hours passed while I clicked through page after page of results that had nothing to do with what I was looking for. My eyes burned from staring at the screen. I ordered coffee from a place down the street and drank it cold because I forgot it was sitting next to me. Social media platforms were next. I created fake accounts to search for Eleanor Price, for anyone who might have known her or mentioned her. I found 3 Eleanor Prices on one site, 2 on another, none of them the right age or location. I searched for Millbrook community groups, local pages, anything that might have discussed the fire. The town had a Facebook page with 42 members. The most recent post was from 6 months ago, about a bake sale. I scrolled back through years of posts, potluck dinners, school events, road construction updates. Not one mention of a fire or Eleanor Price or February 2019. It was like the whole town had agreed to forget. On the 4th day, I called my aunt. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. Her voice sounded tight and worried when she said my name like a question. I told her I'd left Millbrook like she wanted. The relief in her voice was so strong I could hear it through the phone. She asked if I was okay, where I was, whether anyone followed me. I told her I was fine, I was far away, and nobody knew where I went. Then I asked her why she told me to leave. What did our family have to do with Millbrook? Why did she panic when I mentioned the town? She went quiet. I listened to her breathing on the other end of the line. 30 seconds passed. A minute. I was about to ask if she was still there when she finally spoke. She told me this wasn't a phone conversation. She told me to come visit her in person. She had things to show me that I needed to see with my own eyes. I asked her what things. She said she'd explain everything when I got there, but not over the phone. Then she gave me her address, even though I already had it, and told me to come as soon as I could. I packed my bag and checked out of the motel. The drive to my aunt's house took 3 hours, through back roads and small towns. I'd only visited her twice before, both times for family holidays when I was younger. She lived in a ranch house with a neat lawn and flower beds along the front walk. I parked in her driveway and sat in the car for a moment, trying to prepare myself for whatever she was going to tell me. When I finally walked up to the front door and knocked, she opened it immediately, like she was watching for me. Her face went pale when she saw me. She stared at me the same way the people in Millbrook stared, like I was someone else wearing a mask. She reached out and touched my cheek with trembling fingers. Then she pulled me inside and locked the door behind us. She led me to the kitchen without saying anything. Her hands shook while she filled the kettle and put it on the stove. I sat at the kitchen table, and that's when I noticed the newspaper clippings. They were spread across the whole surface, dozens of them, some yellow with age and others more recent. I leaned closer and saw dates from the 1970s, headlines about Millbrook, photographs of people I didn't recognize. My aunt set 2 mugs on the counter and turned to face me. She looked older than I remembered, or maybe just tired. She told me she needed to explain something about our family history, something she discovered last year that she'd been trying to understand ever since. She sat down across from me and started talking. Last year, she got interested in genealogy, one of those DNA testing kits that shows you your family tree. She started researching our grandmother's side of the family, looking through old records and census data. That's when she found a mention in an old Millbrook newspaper from 1974. Our grandmother had a sister, a younger sister nobody in our family ever talked about. And this sister married a man from Millbrook and moved there in the early 70s. My aunt showed me the newspaper clipping. It was a wedding announcement. The text was barely readable after so many years, but I could make out the names and the date and the town. The family lost touch with this sister decades ago. Nobody knew what happened to her or why she disappeared from family gatherings and holiday cards. My aunt tried asking my mother about it, but my mother didn't remember ever having an aunt or hearing about her grandmother's sister. The whole branch of the family just vanished from our history. My aunt pulled out a photograph from the pile of clippings. It was grainy and faded, dated 1978 on the back in pencil. A woman stood in front of a house, smiling at the camera. She looked exactly like my grandmother. Same nose, same eyes, same way of holding her shoulders. My aunt pointed at the photo and told me this is what made her start digging deeper. This resemblance. She showed me another photo, this one of my grandmother from around the same time. The 2 women could have been twins, even though they were sisters born 5 years apart. My aunt explained that this particular bone structure and facial features run strong in our family. They repeat across generations, showing up in daughters and granddaughters and nieces. She showed me a photo of herself from the 80s, and I saw it too. The same face looking back at me from 3 different decades. My aunt became obsessed with finding this lost branch of the family tree. She spent months tracking down records, calling distant relatives, searching through old phone books and property records. She finally discovered that the sister and her husband moved away from Millbrook in 2003. They relocated to another state, and their trail went cold after that. But my aunt kept searching. She found a second cousin, someone descended from the sister's husband's family. She called this cousin and asked about Millbrook and our missing relatives. The cousin refused to talk about it. She told my aunt to stop digging into Millbrook's history. She said some things are better left buried, and hung up. My aunt tried calling back several times, but the cousin blocked her number. That was 6 months ago. My aunt had been trying to decide whether to keep searching or let it go when I called her and told her I'd moved to Millbrook. She looked at me across the table and told me she panicked when she heard I was living in that town. She'd learned enough to know something terrible happened there, something connected to our family resemblance. She didn't know the specific details about Eleanor or the fire or any of it. She just knew that Millbrook had a dark history and that a face like ours was somehow part of it. That's why she told me to leave. That's why she hung up and texted me to get out immediately. She was afraid of what might happen to me in a town that had bad memories attached to a face I inherited through no fault of my own. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the photograph I took at Eleanor's grave. My hands shook a little as I turned the screen toward my aunt. She leaned forward, squinting at first. Then her face went completely white. She set down her teacup, and it rattled against the saucer. Her hand moved to her mouth, and she stared at the image for what felt like a full minute without speaking. Finally, she reached for her own phone and started scrolling through old files with fingers that wouldn't quite cooperate. She found something and showed me a blurry screenshot, barely visible, dated from 6 months ago. It was Eleanor standing in front of what looked like a post office. The image quality was terrible, like it was zoomed in from far away. My aunt told me she found this one photo online before everything got scrubbed. Saved it because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The resemblance isn't just wrong, she said quietly. It's impossible to explain in any rational way. We look exactly the same, down to details that shouldn't repeat across unrelated people. She spread her genealogy research across the table, and we spent the next 4 hours going through everything. Birth certificates, census records, marriage licenses, death certificates, immigration papers from 3 generations back. My aunt had been thorough, tracking every branch of our family tree with dates and locations and sources, but there was nothing connecting us to Eleanor Price. No shared ancestors, no adoptions that might explain it, no family members who moved to Millbrook or had any connection to that area. Eleanor's documented history starts when she arrived in Millbrook 6 years ago, 3 years before the fire. Before that, she's a complete blank. My aunt showed me where she tried to trace Eleanor backward through property records and employment history, but hit a wall at 2016. It's like Eleanor appeared out of nowhere, already an adult, already using that name, with no past anyone could find. My aunt sat back and rubbed her eyes. She suggested maybe Eleanor was from our extended family somehow, a distant branch nobody kept in touch with. Maybe she was adopted out or estranged, cut off from family gatherings and holiday cards decades ago, which would explain why nobody recognizes her name, even if the genetic resemblance stayed strong. It makes sense in a way, she said, because these facial features run so powerfully through our bloodline. But even as she was saying it, I could see she didn't quite believe it either, because it doesn't explain why Eleanor chose Millbrook specifically if she had family connections there. And it definitely doesn't explain what drove her to pour accelerant around the exits of a community center and trap 14 people inside to burn to death. My aunt's voice dropped when she said this last part, like speaking it quieter would make it less horrible. I left around sunset with a thick folder of copied documents tucked under my arm. My aunt walked me to my car and hugged me longer than usual, telling me to be careful, telling me to call her if I needed anything. I could see the worry in her face, the same worry that made her hang up and text me to leave Millbrook immediately. She was afraid I was going to disappear into this mystery the same way Eleanor disappeared into whatever darkness was chasing her. But I couldn't let it go. If Eleanor looked exactly like me, if we shared this face that people in Millbrook would never forget, then understanding her was the only way I'd ever understand why this happened to me. Maybe it wouldn't change anything, but I needed to know who she was and what broke inside her. I drove for 2 hours to a city I'd never visited before. One far enough from Millbrook that nobody would recognize me or connect me to Eleanor's crimes. The public library was old and quiet, the kind with high ceilings and wooden card catalogs still mounted on the walls, even though everything's digital now. I approached the reference desk and asked about interlibrary loans for newspaper archives from surrounding counties. The librarian, an older man with reading glasses on a chain, explained the process without asking why I needed them. I filled out request forms for papers from 3 different towns near Millbrook, all dated February and March 2019. Millbrook might have erased their own records, but a mass casualty event would have made front-page news in every nearby community. The librarian told me it'd take a few weeks for the microfilm to arrive from storage facilities and other libraries. I thanked him and left my contact information, then spent the rest of the afternoon in my car trying to figure out what to do with myself while I waited. 3 weeks felt like 3 months. I found a cheap apartment in the same city as the library, got a temporary job doing data entry remotely, so I could pay rent. Every few days, I called the library to check if the newspapers had arrived yet. Finally, on a Tuesday morning, the librarian called me back and told me the microfilm reels were ready. I was there within an hour. He set me up at one of the old microfilm readers in a quiet corner, showed me how to thread the film and adjust the focus. Then he left me alone with stacks of archived newspapers from February 2019. I scrolled through edition after edition. Local news about school board meetings and high school basketball games, obituaries for people who died peacefully in their sleep. Then I found it. February 17th, 2019, 2 days after the fire. The headline took up half the front page. 14 dead in Millbrook Community Center arson. There's a photograph of the building, or what's left of it, just a burned shell with collapsed roof beams and smoke damage blackening the walls. Fire trucks surrounded it. Firefighters were still hosing down hot spots. The article described how the fire started around 8 p.m. on Friday night, February 15th, during the annual winter fundraiser. The community center was packed with families, maybe 150 people total, kids running around while their parents bid on silent auction items and ate donated food. Someone poured accelerant around the main exits and set it on fire. The doors became walls of flame within minutes. People tried to escape through windows, but some of them were locked or blocked. Investigators determined it was deliberate arson with clear intent to trap people inside. The suspect, Eleanor Price, was identified through security camera footage and witness statements, but she disappeared before police could apprehend her. I kept scrolling and found a follow-up article from the next page. This one focused on Eleanor herself. Quiet resident who had lived in Millbrook for 3 years, worked remotely as a graphic designer, kept to herself, paid her rent on time, never caused any problems. The article quoted neighbors who sounded completely confused. One woman said, Eleanor seemed perfectly normal, always said hello, sometimes brought cookies to neighborhood gatherings. Another neighbor mentioned Eleanor helped him carry groceries once when he was recovering from surgery. Nobody suspected anything wrong. There were no warning signs, no conflicts with anyone in town, no history of mental illness or violent behavior that anyone knew about. Eleanor was just there, living a quiet life, until suddenly she wasn't. A March 2019 article revealed what happened to Eleanor after the fire. Her body was found in a wooded area about 15 miles from Millbrook, dead from exposure and hypothermia. She'd fled into the wilderness after setting the fire and died alone 3 days later. The article says authorities concluded she chose to disappear rather than face justice for what she'd done. There's a quote from the sheriff saying they would have preferred to bring her in alive so the victims' families could get answers, but at least knowing she was dead brought some closure. I stared at that word, closure, and wondered if anyone in Millbrook actually felt that way. The victim list was printed in a separate article. All 14 names, with brief descriptions. The Brennan family, parents, and 2 children aged 6 and 9. Martha Lim, 73, volunteer coordinator. Robert Hayes, 61, fire chief who died trying to evacuate people. Jennifer and Michael Oakes, engaged couple planning their wedding. I read every name, every age, every detail about who they were and what they were doing that night. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking and I felt sick. These are the deaths Millbrook sees when they look at my face. These are the people Eleanor killed, and I'm walking around wearing her features like a mask I can't take off. I understood now why the coffee shop owner's hands trembled. Why teenagers crossed the street to avoid me. Why Carl told me the town would never let me be anyone but Eleanor's ghost. I scrolled through more archived pages until I found what I was looking for. Eleanor Price's obituary sat at the bottom of page 12 in a county paper from 40 miles away. The notice took up maybe 3 inches of column space. Born August 3, 1987. Died February 18, 2019, in Millbrook. No surviving family members listed. No funeral services scheduled. No charitable donations requested in lieu of flowers. The paper didn't mention what she did or how she died, just those bare facts, like she was anyone else, like her death was normal and unremarkable. The notation at the end says, simply, that she died in Millbrook. Nothing about the fire or the 14 people or any of it. I screenshotted the obituary and saved it to a folder on my phone that was getting fuller every day. Over the next week, I searched for anything about Eleanor before Millbrook. I tried every search engine I could think of, every social media platform, every public records database. Nothing came up. No Facebook profile, no Instagram account, no Twitter presence. I searched for her name combined with graphic design, her supposed profession, and found a few Eleanor Prices, but none of them matched the right age or location. I tried searching for her in professional directories, freelance websites, portfolio platforms. She's not there. I looked for property records, voter registration, court documents, anything that would show where she lived before moving to Millbrook 3 years before the fire. The trail went completely cold. It's like Eleanor Price didn't exist anywhere until she showed up in that small town, lived quietly for 36 months, then burned it all down and walked into the woods to die. I started spending every evening after work searching for explanations. The articles I found mentioned police discovered no manifesto, no suicide note, no journal explaining her actions. Investigators interviewed everyone who knew her and found no history of mental illness, no radicalization, no grudges against anyone in town. The sheriff's statement said Eleanor seemed to have no motive at all, that she just woke up one February morning and decided to kill her neighbors during a fundraiser where families brought their children. I read true crime forums looking for similar cases, trying to find patterns that might explain what happened. Some people commit mass violence because of delusions or voices telling them what to do. Others do it for revenge or ideology or attention. Eleanor didn't fit any of those categories. She planned it carefully, brought accelerant, blocked the exits, then disappeared without leaving any explanation behind. The randomness of it made my skin crawl worse than if she'd had some twisted reason. The dreams got worse. I'd wake up 3 or 4 times a night now, always in that room with yellow curtains, always smelling smoke that wasn't there. Sometimes I was standing at a window, watching flames. Sometimes I was running through hallways. Sometimes I was just sitting on a bed, feeling nothing at all. The dreams felt more real than my actual memories lately. I catch myself during the day thinking about that house, wondering what room it was and why the curtains were yellow and what happened there. These weren't my memories, but they were starting to feel like they could be. I woke up one morning and walked to the bathroom and saw my face in the mirror. And for just a second, I didn't recognize myself. For just a second, I was Eleanor looking back at me, and I had to grip the sink and remind myself who I actually am. My aunt called on a Thursday evening while I was making dinner. I answered and started telling her about the obituary I found, about how Eleanor had no family and no history before Millbrook. My aunt cut me off and asked why I was still researching this, why I hadn't moved on yet. I told her I needed to understand what would drive someone to do what Eleanor did. My aunt went quiet for a long moment. Then she said I was talking about Eleanor like I knew her personally, like we were friends or something. She said I was using Eleanor's first name constantly, saying it with this familiarity that worried her. I hadn't noticed I was doing that. I told my aunt I was just trying to understand, that's all, but she said understanding a monster doesn't require becoming one. She asked if I was eating enough, sleeping enough, taking care of myself. I lied and said yes to all 3. After we hung up, I realized I'd been talking about Eleanor for 40 minutes straight, analyzing her actions like I was trying to solve a puzzle that would somehow explain everything. Maybe my aunt was right to be worried. I decided I needed to see where Eleanor died. One article mentioned her body was found in a woodland preserve north of Millbrook, but it didn't give specifics. I told myself I was looking for closure, some kind of final understanding that would let me stop thinking about this constantly. Really, I just needed to see the place, to stand where she stood in those last hours, to maybe feel something that would make sense of all this. I drove back toward Millbrook on a Saturday morning, my stomach tight with anxiety about getting too close to that town again. I passed the turnoff for Millbrook itself and kept going north until I saw signs for the preserve. The parking area was mostly empty, just 2 other cars and a ranger station at the trailhead. The preserve stretched out in dense forest, hiking trails marked with colored blazes on trees. I started walking without any real destination, just following paths deeper into the woods. Eleanor came here after setting the fire. She had 3 days before hypothermia killed her. 3 days to think about what she'd done, or to feel nothing at all. I wondered if she felt remorse walking these same trails. I wondered if she felt satisfaction or relief, or just emptiness. I wondered if she cried or screamed or stayed silent. The trees are thick enough that sound doesn't carry far. You could disappear here, and nobody would find you for days or weeks. Eleanor chose that. Chose to vanish into the wilderness rather than face what came next. I'd been walking for maybe 2 hours when a park ranger came down the trail toward me. He was in his 50s, wearing the standard uniform, and he looked concerned. He asked if I was lost or needed help finding my way back. I told him I was fine, just hiking, but he studied my face like he was trying to place me. I explained quickly that I was researching a historical incident. Nothing weird, just trying to understand something that happened here years ago. The ranger nodded slowly and said, "People come looking for that spot sometimes. The place where that woman died back in 2019. He said the exact location was never made public, kept quiet to prevent it from becoming some kind of morbid attraction. I asked if he was here when it happened. He shook his head and mentioned his predecessor dealt with the whole investigation, but he heard about it when he took over the position. The ranger told me the whole thing was strange from what he understands. Eleanor had survival gear with her when they found her body. A tent, sleeping bag, food supplies, water purification tablets, everything you'd need to survive in the woods for weeks. She'd clearly planned to disappear, to live out here and never be found. But she didn't use any of it. The gear was still packed in her backpack, unopened, like she'd carried it all the way out here and then just gave up on the whole plan. I asked what he meant by gave up. The ranger explained that Eleanor was found only 3 days after the fire, and based on where her body was located, she'd barely made it 5 miles into the preserve. She had supplies for weeks, maybe months if she rationed carefully. She had maps and a compass. She had everything she needed to vanish completely, but she didn't set up camp, didn't try to survive, didn't make any effort to use the gear she'd brought. It's like she walked into the woods, found a spot away from the trails, sat down and just stopped. Stopped moving, stopped trying, stopped everything. She died from exposure in early spring, when the nights were cold but not deadly if you had shelter and warmth. The ranger says it looked like she chose to die, like that was always part of her plan. But then why bring all that survival equipment in the first place? I thought about that detail the whole drive back to my motel. Eleanor carried survival gear into those woods like she planned to disappear forever, but then she just stopped. She sat down somewhere in the trees and let the cold take her. The ranger's words kept playing in my head about how she had everything she needed to live for weeks or months, but she didn't even unpack her tent. It wasn't suicide exactly because she walked all that way with supplies, but it wasn't survival either. She was doing something else, following some plan that only made sense to her. I pulled into the motel parking lot as the sun set and the sky turned orange and purple. My room smelled like old carpet and cleaning chemicals. I spread all my notes across the bed again. The newspaper articles and my scribbled timelines and the photographs I printed from the library microfilm. The fire happened on February 15th. Eleanor's grave marker said she died February 18th, 3 days exactly between burning down the community center and dying in the woods. I searched my laptop for anything special about February 15th, but found nothing. No historical event, no famous tragedy, no reason that date would mean something to someone planning mass murder. I tried different search terms, looking for patterns in other crimes, other fires, other cases where someone chose that specific date. Nothing connected. February 15th was just a Friday night in 2019 when Millbrook held their annual winter fundraiser, and Eleanor decided that was the night to destroy everything. I read the victim list again, even though I had it memorized. 14 names, ages ranging from 6 years old to 73. Families who went to support their community and never came home. The the fire chief who died trying to save people, a teacher, a mechanic, a retired nurse, 3 children. Eleanor knew these people, lived in the same small town, probably saw them at the grocery store and the post office. She chose to kill them anyway. My bank account was down to $800. I'd been living in this motel for 3 weeks, eating gas station sandwiches and instant ramen, not working, just researching a dead woman who looked like me. I needed to find a job before my money ran out completely. I needed to find a real apartment, start building some kind of normal life. But every time I thought about moving on, I saw that photograph from Eleanor's grave, showing my exact face. I couldn't let go of needing to understand why. I spent the next 2 days applying for remote jobs, anything that would let me work from wherever I ended up. Customer service positions, data entry, virtual assistant work, mindless jobs that paid enough to survive. During video interviews, I'd catch myself wondering if the person on the other end of the screen saw Eleanor when they looked at my face. Do I look like someone who could burn down a building full of people? Is there something in my eyes or my expression that marks me as capable of that kind of violence? The interviewers smiled and asked normal questions about my experience and availability, and I answered in my most professional voice, while inside, I was thinking about a woman who wore my face and chose death over facing what she'd done. A company hired me to handle customer service emails for their online store. The pay was low but steady, and they didn't care where I lived as long as I responded to emails within 24 hours. I gave notice at the motel and used my last bit of money to rent a studio apartment in a mid-sized city, 2 states away from Millbrook. The apartment was small and plain, with white walls and worn carpet, but nobody here knew about Eleanor Price or the community center fire. I could walk down the street without people crossing to avoid me. I could buy groceries without seeing fear in the cashier's eyes. I set up my laptop on the tiny kitchen table and started my new job, answering emails about shipping delays and product returns. The work was boring and repetitive, exactly what I needed. During the day, I typed responses about refund policies and tracking numbers. At night, I researched Eleanor, searching for patterns in her movements, clues in her sparse digital footprint, anything that might explain what happened. Months passed like this. Work during the day, research at night, sleep when I was too exhausted to keep my eyes open. My aunt called every Sunday to check on me. She asked how I was doing, if I was eating enough, if I'd made any friends in my new city. I'd tell her I was fine, everything was fine. I was settling in and moving forward. But she could hear something in my voice that worried her. She told me I needed to let go of this obsession with Eleanor, that it's not healthy to spend all my time thinking about a woman who committed such terrible crimes. I know she was right, but I couldn't stop. I joined online forums about unsolved mysteries and true crime. I read case studies about people who commit seemingly random violence. I posted careful questions about perpetrators who had no clear motive, trying to understand the psychology without revealing that I shared a face with one of them. Other forum members discussed mental illness, childhood trauma, radicalization, but none of it fit what I knew about Eleanor. She wasn't mentally ill according to any records. She had no history of violence or threats. She just lived quietly in Millbrook for 3 years, and then one night she destroyed everything. Someone in a forum posted a theory that made me stop scrolling. They were talking about people who commit atrocities and then immediately die by suicide. How these people are often acting out some internal narrative they've constructed. The violence isn't about anger or revenge. It's about completing a story they've written in their heads where their death is the final chapter, not an escape from consequences. They plan everything, including their own ending, because the ending is the point. I read the post 3 times, then read it again. This fit Eleanor in a way nothing else had. She didn't run into the woods to survive. She ran to complete her story. The fire was Act 1, and her death 3 days later was the planned conclusion. She carried survival gear because that's what someone fleeing into the wilderness would carry. But she never intended to use it. She walked into those trees knowing she would die there. That dying was part of whatever narrative she was living out. The 3 days between the fire and her death weren't about hiding or escaping. They were about existing in some in-between space, some liminal state where she'd completed her terrible act, but hadn't yet reached her planned ending. I started looking into Eleanor's work history because the article said she was a graphic designer. I searched for any business websites or portfolio she might have had, anything that could show what kind of person she was before everything happened. It took hours of searching through archived websites and old business directories, but finally I found something. An archived version of a website called E.B. Price Design popped up on an old web archive service. The site was basic, just a homepage with a portfolio section and a contact page. I clicked through the portfolio samples and felt disappointed by how ordinary everything looked. Corporate logos for small businesses, wedding invitation designs, some brochures for local events. The work was good enough, professional, but there's nothing personal about it. No style that feels unique to Eleanor. No passion projects or creative experiments. It's like she was just going through the motions, doing work that paid bills without putting any real piece of herself into it. I studied each design, looking for clues about who she was, but they could have been made by anyone. The wedding invitations are pretty, but generic. The logos are clean, but forgettable. It's the portfolio of someone performing the role of a normal small-town designer without actually being invested in the work. I clicked over to the contact page and wrote down the information listed there. A P.O. box in Millbrook that probably doesn't exist anymore. A generic email address that's long dead. But at the bottom of the page, there's a small copyright notice with the year the site was created. And I realized I could look up the domain registration records. I found a website that archives old domain registration information and typed in Eleanor's business name. The record showed she registered the domain 8 years ago, and the registration used a physical address for billing purposes, not a Millbrook address. The address listed was in a town called Riverside, 3 states away from here. I stared at this information, feeling my pulse quicken because this was the first concrete evidence I'd found of Eleanor's life before Millbrook. She lived somewhere else before moving here. I searched property records for Riverside and found that Eleanor rented an apartment there for 2 years before moving to Millbrook. The apartment was in a small complex on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a basic 1-bedroom unit. I kept digging and found that before Riverside, Eleanor had another rental address in a different state, a town called Greenfield. I spent the rest of the night tracing Eleanor's address history backward through rental records and old utility bills I could find in public databases. She moved every 2 to 3 years, like clockwork. Always to small towns nobody had heard of. Always keeping a low profile with no social media presence or community involvement. Riverside for 2 years, then Millbrook for 3. Before Riverside was Greenfield for 2 years. Before that was a town called Ashton for almost 3 years. I mapped out all the locations, and they're scattered across the country, with no pattern I can see. No connection between the places, except that they're all small and quiet. It's like Eleanor was running from something or searching for something, moving from place to place trying to find whatever she needed or escape whatever was chasing her. The pattern goes back about 10 years before Millbrook, which means Eleanor spent a whole decade of her life moving between small towns and never settling anywhere permanently. I tried to find anything from before that earliest address in Ashton 12 years ago, but there's nothing. No college records with her name, no childhood home address, no family connections I can trace. Eleanor Price seems to appear in official records starting 12 years ago, when she was in her late 20s, and before that she's just gone. It's like she didn't exist before Ashton, or she existed under a different name. I leaned back from my laptop, feeling exhausted and confused. The fire in Millbrook wasn't random violence from a disturbed person. Eleanor had been running from something for years, moving every few years like she was trying to stay ahead of something. Whatever she was running from finally caught up with her in Millbrook, and that's when she burned it all down. The fire was the end point of whatever had been chasing her through all those towns and years. I knew I needed help to dig any deeper into Eleanor's past. I couldn't access birth records or sealed documents on my own. I searched online for private investigators and found one who handles background checks and historical research. I called the number even though it was late, and a man answered, sounding tired but professional. I explained that I needed help researching someone's background from before they started using a particular name, and there was a long pause. He asked why I needed this information, and I told him a version of the truth, that I'm trying to understand someone who committed a crime, and I need to know their history. He was skeptical but agreed to take the case after I explained what I'd already found and what I was looking for. The fee was more than I could really afford right now, but I gave him my credit card information anyway because I needed to understand this. I sent him all the information I'd gathered about Eleanor's addresses and timeline. He said he'd search for birth records, school records, anything that might exist from before Eleanor started her pattern of moving. He warned me it might take several weeks, and he might not find anything at all if Eleanor was using an assumed name. I told him to search anyway because I need to know. The weeks that followed were hard. I went to work during the day, typing responses to customer service emails, but my mind was always on Eleanor and what the investigator might find. I checked my email obsessively, waiting for updates. My aunt called every few days, asking how I was doing, and I could hear the worry in her voice when I told her I was still researching Eleanor's background. She thinks I'm getting too deep into this, that I'm losing myself in someone else's story. Maybe she's right, but I can't stop now. 6 weeks after I hired him, the investigator finally emailed me his report. I opened the attachment with shaking hands and read through his findings. There's almost nothing. Eleanor Price appears in official records starting 12 years ago, when she applied for a driver's license in Ashton using that name. Before that, nothing. No birth certificate under that name, no school records, no previous addresses. The investigator writes that Eleanor Price is most likely an assumed identity, that the woman I know as Eleanor was probably using a different name before Ashton. He suggests several possibilities for why someone would change their identity. Witness protection programs sometimes relocate people with new identities. People fleeing abusive relationships sometimes take new names to hide from their abusers. People with criminal pasts sometimes try to disappear and start over. Any of these could explain why Eleanor changed her name and started moving between small towns. And any of them could also explain why she eventually had a breakdown and committed such terrible violence. But there's no way to verify which scenario is true without cooperation from official agencies. And they won't help with a case this old, involving someone who's already dead. I read the report 3 times, looking for anything I might have missed, but the investigator was thorough. Eleanor's past before Ashton is completely gone, erased or hidden so well that even a professional can't find it. I paid the investigator's final invoice and closed my laptop, feeling defeated. I'm right back where I started, with more questions than answers. The only thing I know for certain is that Eleanor Price spent years running from something, ended up in Millbrook wearing my face, and then destroyed herself along with 14 innocent people for reasons I'll probably never understand. I closed the investigator's report and sat in my studio apartment, staring at the wall for what feels like hours. Eleanor Price's past is a dead end, a door that leads nowhere, and I've spent thousands of dollars I didn't have chasing a ghost who doesn't want to be found. The investigator's words kept circling in my head about witness protection and abusive relationships and criminal pasts, all these possible explanations that explain nothing at all. I can make up stories about who Eleanor was before she became Eleanor, but that's all they are. Stories I tell myself to fill the empty spaces. The truth is that Eleanor took her reasons to the grave along with 14 innocent people. And no amount of research or money or obsession is going to bring those answers back. My aunt showed up 3 days later without warning, using the spare key I gave her for emergencies. I was still in my pajamas at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, surrounded by printed documents and handwritten timelines spread across every surface of my apartment. She stood in the doorway looking at the walls where I'd taped photographs and news clippings, her face going pale as she took in the full extent of what I'd been doing. She didn't say anything at first, just walked to my kitchen and started making tea, like she used to when I was a kid and needed comfort. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm, asking when I last ate a real meal or went outside or talked to anyone who wasn't connected to Eleanor Price. I told her I ate yesterday, though I can't actually remember what, and she gave me a look that says she knows I'm lying. She sat down on my couch, the only furniture not covered in research materials, and patted the cushion next to her. She told me I looked terrible, that I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, that my skin was pale, and my eyes had dark circles like I hadn't slept properly in weeks. She's right. I know she's right. But I can't seem to care about my own health when there are still questions about Eleanor that need answers. My aunt picked up one of my timelines, studying the dates and locations I've mapped out, showing Eleanor's movements over 12 years, and she set it down carefully, like it might break. She asked me what I think I'm going to find. What possible answer would make all this worth sacrificing my own life for? And I don't have a good response. She said, "You need to let this go. That some questions don't have answers. And that's just how life works sometimes. That you can't spend the rest of your days trying to understand a dead woman who set fire to innocent people." I tried to explain that it's not that simple. That Eleanor's face is my face. And everywhere I go, people will see her crimes when they look at me. That understanding why she did it is the only way I can separate myself from what she did. My aunt's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for my hand, holding it between both of hers. She said, "You're losing yourself in Eleanor's mystery. You came here after the divorce, looking for a fresh start, and instead you found an obsession that's consuming you." She said she's watched me disappear into this research the same way Eleanor disappeared into those woods, and she's scared I won't find my way back out. She begged me to see a therapist, to talk to someone professional who can help me process what happened in Millbrook. I wanted to argue, but the words stuck in my throat. Looking at my apartment through her eyes, seeing the way I've turned my living space into a shrine to a murderer, I realized she might be right. I've been so focused on understanding Eleanor that I stopped taking care of myself, stopped thinking about my own future, stopped being a person separate from this mystery. That night, after my aunt left, promising to call me every day to check in, I had the dream about yellow curtains again. But this time, it's different, more detailed than ever before. I'm in a child's bedroom with sunshine coming through those yellow curtains, and there's a small bed with a patchwork quilt and toys scattered on the floor. The room feels safe at first, warm and comfortable, but then the feeling shifts into something else, something that makes my chest tight with fear. I can hear footsteps in the hallway outside, heavy and deliberate, and the doorknob starts to turn slowly. And I want to hide, but there's nowhere to go. And the fear is so intense it feels like drowning. Then I smell smoke, thick and choking, and I wake up gasping in my own bed with my heart trying to break through my ribs. I sit up in the darkness, and the smell of smoke lingers even though nothing is burning. My hands are shaking, and I'm covered in sweat. And for a few seconds, I can't remember who I am or where I am. The dream felt so real, so vivid, like it was an actual memory instead of something my brain made up. I found myself convinced that this was Eleanor's memory somehow, that her experiences are bleeding into my unconscious mind through some connection I don't understand. The child's bedroom, the fear, the smoke. It all feels like pieces of Eleanor's past trying to tell me something important. I get up and write down everything I remember about the dream, adding it to my research materials. Even though I know this is crazy, I know I'm projecting, creating false memories from stress and obsession, building connections that don't exist because my brain is desperate to make sense of the senseless. The rational part of my mind understands that dreams are just dreams, that my subconscious is processing the trauma of being mistaken for a murderer, and it's creating these vivid scenarios as a way to cope. The dreams always end with smoke because that's how Eleanor's story ends, with fire and death and destruction. And my brain is trying to work through the horror of sharing her face. But knowing this doesn't make the dreams feel less real, doesn't stop me from waking up with the smell of smoke in my nose and the taste of fear in my mouth. It's like my subconscious is trying to tell me something about fire and fear and escape, trying to make me understand something I can't quite grasp. I spent the rest of the night sitting at my kitchen table, staring at my research and wondering if I'm slowly losing my mind. 3 days later, I finally made an appointment with a therapist, admitting to myself that I needed professional help to process everything that's happened. The therapist's office was in a bland medical building, all beige walls and generic landscape paintings, and I sat in the waiting room filling out intake forms about my mental health history. When the therapist called me back, she was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a calm voice that made me want to cry. I told her the whole story from the beginning, about moving to Millbrook and the resemblance to Eleanor and the grave and the town's reaction and my obsessive research afterward. She listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally. And when I finished, She sat back in her chair and considered me carefully. She says, "What you experienced in Millbrook was deeply traumatic, being confronted with a stranger's crimes while wearing that stranger's face, and your response has been to try to understand Eleanor as a way of protecting yourself from being confused with her." The therapist explains that I'm experiencing a trauma response, that my brain is trying to process an impossible situation by obsessively researching Eleanor's background. She says, "The research gives you a sense of control over something that felt completely out of control, but it's also keeping you stuck in the trauma instead of helping you heal from it." She suggests that what I really need is to focus on my own healing, on rebuilding my identity separate from Eleanor's history, on moving forward with my life instead of backward into a dead woman's past. I wanted to argue with her, to explain that she doesn't understand how important it is for me to know why Eleanor did what she did, but something in her gentle expression stopped me. She asks me what I think understanding Eleanor will accomplish, what I believe will change once I know her story, and I realize I don't have a good answer. Over the next several weeks of therapy sessions, I started to understand that my obsession with Eleanor is really about my own identity crisis. The divorce happened because I lost myself in my marriage, became someone I didn't recognize, and when it ended, I had no idea who I was anymore. The financial collapse left me feeling powerless and ashamed, like I'd failed at being an adult. Moving to Millbrook was supposed to be about finding myself again, starting fresh in a place where nobody knew my history. But instead, I found Eleanor, and her history became mine. The therapist helps me see that Eleanor's story gave me something external to focus on, a mystery to solve that felt more manageable than facing my own pain and confusion. It was easier to research a dead woman's crimes than to deal with my own grief and loss and fear about the future. I began the difficult work of separating Eleanor's story from my own, of accepting that we share a face, but we're not the same person. The therapist gives me exercises to practice, ways of redirecting my thoughts when they spiral toward Eleanor, techniques for grounding myself in my own identity instead of hers. She reminds me that I don't need to understand Eleanor to reclaim my own life, that her choices and her crimes and her death have nothing to do with who I am or who I can become. It's hard work, harder than any research I did, because it requires me to sit with uncomfortable feelings instead of distracting myself with investigation. I have to feel the grief about my divorce, the shame about my financial situation, the fear about building a new life. All the emotions I was avoiding by focusing on Eleanor. My therapist helps me see that some mysteries are truly unsolvable, and that's okay. That not every question has an answer, and I can learn to live with uncertainty. Eleanor took her reasons to the grave when she died in those woods, and I can choose to let her keep them instead of sacrificing my mental health, trying to dig up answers that don't exist. She asks me what I would do with my time and energy if I wasn't researching Eleanor, what kind of life I want to build for myself, and I realize I haven't thought about my own future in months. I've been so consumed with Eleanor's past that I forgot I have a present and a future that belong to me alone. I boxed up all my research materials on a Saturday morning, putting every document and photograph and timeline into cardboard boxes. I don't throw them away, because I'm not quite ready for that level of letting go. But I tape the boxes shut and carry them down to a storage unit I rent specifically for this purpose. Removing Eleanor's presence from my apartment feels like lifting a weight I didn't realize I was carrying. And when I come back to my empty walls and clear surfaces, I can finally breathe properly. My apartment is mine again, not a shrine to someone else's tragedy. And I stand in the middle of my living room feeling lighter than I have in months. I signed up for a book club at the local library on a Tuesday afternoon, choosing one that meets weekly and reads mostly mysteries and thrillers. The first meeting I attend, nobody stares or whispers or crosses to the other side of the room. They just hand me a copy of the current book and ask if I want coffee. I joined a pottery class at the community center on Thursday evenings, and the instructor shows me how to center clay on the wheel without asking where I'm from or if I look familiar. These small, normal interactions feel strange at first, like I'm waiting for someone to recognize something that isn't there. But weeks pass, and I'm just another person in the group, someone who makes lopsided bowls and laughs at her own mistakes. I started getting coffee with a woman from book club named Lisa, and we talk about our favorite authors and our terrible exes without any weight of tragedy hanging over the conversation. At pottery class, I chat with the other students about weekend plans and new restaurants. Ordinary topics that don't require me to explain or defend or prove anything about who I am. Slowly, in these small, repeated moments of being seen as just myself, I remembered what it feels like to exist without constant examination. I go to a farmer's market on Saturday mornings and buy fresh vegetables from vendors who smile and make small talk about the weather. I joined a gym and take yoga classes where the instructor learns my name and nobody asks about scars or resemblances. These everyday activities feel like rebuilding something I'd lost, the simple ability to move through the world as an individual rather than a symbol of someone else's nightmare. 6 months after leaving Millbrook, I woke up on a Sunday morning and realized I slept through the entire night without dreaming about yellow curtains. The dreams still come sometimes, usually when I'm stressed or overtired, but they're less frequent now, and I've learned to recognize them for what they are. My therapist helped me understand that my brain was processing the trauma of being mistaken for a murderer, not receiving mystical messages from Eleanor's ghost. When I do dream about smoke and fire, I can wake up and remind myself that these are my fears and anxieties taking shape, not some supernatural connection to a dead woman. I keep a journal by my bed and write down the dreams when they happen. And over time, I notice they're getting shorter and less vivid. The house with yellow curtains appears less detailed now, more like a vague impression than a specific memory. My therapist says this is progress, that my mind is slowly releasing the grip of that traumatic period in Millbrook. I still have bad days where the dreams feel more real or where I catch my reflection and feel a moment of disconnection, but those moments are becoming rare exceptions rather than my daily reality. And I'm learning to be patient with myself when they happen. My supervisor called me into her office on a Wednesday afternoon and tells me she's been impressed with my work quality and reliability. She offered me a promotion to senior customer service representative with better pay and more flexible hours. I accepted immediately, feeling something like pride for the first time in years. The raise is enough that I can afford to move out of my studio apartment into a one-bedroom with actual windows that let in sunlight. I spent a weekend apartment hunting and found a place on the 3rd floor with a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. Moving day feels different from when I fled Millbrook with everything thrown into boxes. This time I packed carefully, sorting through my belongings and deciding what to keep and what to donate. I bought new furniture instead of using cast-offs, choosing a bright blue couch and yellow curtains for the living room before I realized what I'd done. I stood in the store holding the yellow fabric and felt my chest tighten. But then I bought them anyway because they're my choice, not Eleanor's memory. I hung plants on the balcony and painted the bedroom walls a soft green. I arranged books on shelves and put up photographs of my family and new friends. Standing in my decorated apartment with sunlight streaming through those yellow curtains I chose myself, I realize I'm finally building something stable instead of just surviving day to day. My aunt visited on a Friday afternoon, taking the train in from her town 3 hours away. When I opened the door, she hugged me tight, and I can feel her relief and how hard she holds on. We sat on my balcony drinking iced tea, and she tells me I look healthy, that there's color in my face again, and light in my eyes. We talked about the family resemblance that caused so much fear and confusion, but now it's just genetics, just the way certain features repeat across generations. My aunt showed me more photographs from her genealogy research, pointing out how our great-grandmother had the same cheekbones, how a cousin twice removed had similar eyes. We laughed about how our family apparently has very strong genes that insist on showing up generation after generation. She asked if I still think about Millbrook, and I tell her the truth, that I do, but not with the same consuming need to understand. We talked about Eleanor briefly, and my aunt said something that sticks with me, that maybe some people are just broken in ways we'll never understand, and that's not our burden to carry. Before she leaves, she makes me promise to visit her for Thanksgiving. And I agree, because I want to spend time with family who sees me as myself, not as anyone's ghost or double. I met someone at book club during a discussion about unreliable narrators. Their name is Sam, and they made a joke about how all narrators are unreliable because memory itself is fiction, and something about their smile made me want to keep talking after the meeting ends. We got coffee and discovered we both moved to the city within the last year for fresh starts. Sam asked about my past, and I told an edited version, the one I've practiced with my therapist. I moved here after a divorce, to start fresh. Needed a change of scenery. Wanted to build a new life. It's all true, even if it's not complete. And Sam nodded with understanding because they're also rebuilding after their own difficulties. I don't mention Millbrook or Eleanor or the cemetery or the photograph. These parts of my history are mine to keep or share as I choose, and right now I choose to keep them private. We started meeting for coffee every week after book club, then going to movies, then cooking dinner at each other's apartments. Sam asks questions about my life, and I answer honestly about the parts I'm ready to share. It feels powerful to have boundaries, to decide which stories belong in new relationships and which ones I'm still processing privately. When Sam holds my hand walking home from a restaurant, I don't think about whether they see Eleanor's face or mine. I just feel the warmth of their palm against mine, and let that be enough. A year after leaving Millbrook, I took stock of my life on a quiet Sunday morning. I have friends who text me to make weekend plans and coworkers who invite me to happy hours. I have a relationship with Sam that's developed into something meaningful and stable, built on honesty and mutual respect. I have a job I'm good at, where my supervisor values my contributions and my opinion matters in team meetings. I have an apartment that feels like home, decorated with things I chose because I like them, not because they were cheap or available. Most importantly, I have a sense of self that isn't defined by Eleanor's crimes or Millbrook's collective trauma or my resemblance to a dead woman. When I introduce myself to new people, I'm just me, with my own history and personality and quirks. I can talk about my divorce without shame, my financial struggles without embarrassment, my choice to start over without having to justify it. The person I see in the mirror is someone I'm slowly learning to recognize, and even like someone who survived something bizarre and traumatic and came out stronger. I still have therapy appointments every other week and probably will for a while longer. I still have moments of anxiety or self-doubt or confusion about identity, but these are normal human struggles, not the consuming obsession that defined my months of researching Eleanor. I think about Eleanor sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep, or when I see news stories about senseless violence. I wonder what happened to her that made her capable of such horror. What pain or anger or broken part of her psyche drove her to murder 14 innocent people. But I think about her with distance now. The way you might wonder about any historical tragedy without letting it consume your daily life. I've accepted that I'll never know why she did what she did. That she took her reasons to her grave when she died alone in those woods. Not knowing doesn't mean I'm incomplete, or that there's some missing piece of myself I need to find. Our shared appearance was just bad luck and genetics, not destiny or cosmic connection. I don't need to understand Eleanor to be whole, and her choices have nothing to do with who I am or who I'm becoming. Sometimes I feel sad for her in an abstract way. Sad that she was so broken she could only express herself through destruction. But that sadness doesn't mean I'm responsible for explaining her or carrying her story forward. I can acknowledge that she existed, that she did terrible things, that she looked like me, and then I can let her rest in whatever peace or torment she found in death. My aunt and I sat at her dining room table on Thanksgiving afternoon, surrounded by her genealogy research spread across every available surface. This time, we're looking for positive family stories instead of dark mysteries and missing connections. We find a great-great-grandfather who is a music teacher and composed small pieces for local celebrations. We discover an aunt who ran a successful bakery during the Depression and fed half the neighborhood for free when times were hardest. There's a cousin who became a rural doctor and delivered babies in farmhouses across 3 counties. These are ordinary people who lived ordinary lives, marked by small kindnesses and quiet perseverance. My aunt shows me photographs of family reunions from the 1950s. Everyone gathered around picnic tables, and we try to identify faces and match them to names in her records. We find farmers and teachers and factory workers, people who raised families and paid their bills and helped their neighbors. This is my real inheritance. Not Eleanor's crimes or Millbrook's trauma, but generations of regular people doing their best with what they had. We laugh about family quirks that seem to repeat, like how every generation apparently includes at least one person who's terrible at cooking, but insists on hosting holidays anyway. By the time we finish going through the research, I feel connected to something larger than myself in a way that's comforting rather than frightening. Then the thought comes to me, fully formed and clear. Identity isn't something that gets assigned to us by others or inherited through appearance or determined by genetics and bone structure. No, it's built through choices and relationships and the daily work of being ourselves. Through the small decisions we make about who to be kind to and what work to do and how to spend our limited time. I've spent this past year actively building an identity that's authentic and mine, constructed from therapy sessions and book club meetings and pottery classes and conversations with Sam. Every time I chose to get out of bed during the hard months, every time I went to therapy instead of hiding in my apartment, every time I introduced myself to someone new despite my fear, I was building who I am. The person I've become isn't defined by my divorce or my financial struggles or my resemblance to Eleanor Price. I'm defined by how I responded to those challenges, by my choice to keep trying even when it was easier to give up, by my willingness to be vulnerable enough to make new friends and start a new relationship. Eleanor and I might have shared a face, but we're completely different people because we made completely different choices about how to exist in the world. She chose destruction, and I'm choosing construction, building a life piece by piece from the rubble of my worst year. I think about Eleanor sometimes when I'm cooking dinner or folding laundry or doing any of the small tasks that make up a normal life. I wonder if she ever had moments like these, peaceful and ordinary, before whatever happened to her turned her into someone who could destroy so many lives. Maybe somewhere in her past, she lost the ability to build her own identity the way I'm building mine now, piece by piece through choices and relationships and the daily work of being a person. Maybe that's what led to her destruction. That loss of self that made violence seem like the only way to be seen or remembered or to matter at all. But I've learned something important through therapy and time and the hard work of healing. Empathy doesn't require understanding every detail of someone's story. And I can feel sad for Eleanor without needing to know exactly what broke inside her or why she made the choices she made. I can acknowledge that she was a person who suffered in some way, while also knowing that her suffering doesn't excuse what she did to those 14 people and their families. These two truths can exist together without contradiction, and accepting that has helped me let go of the obsession that almost consumed me. I look in the mirror now and see myself, not Eleanor's ghost staring back at me. The resemblance is still there, obviously. The same bone structure and features that caused so much trouble in Millbrook, but it doesn't define me anymore. When I think about that town, it's with the distant sadness you feel for any tragedy. The way you might read about a disaster in the news and feel genuine sorrow for the victims, while knowing it's not your burden to carry. The consuming obsession that once defined my days has faded into something manageable. A story I can tell about a strange and difficult time in my life, without it pulling me under. I'm happy now in a way that feels earned and real, built through therapy sessions and hard conversations and the choice to keep trying even when it was easier to give up. I've learned that you can't always understand why terrible things happen, but you can choose to build something good anyway. And that's exactly what I'm doing. What about you? Have you ever had to reclaim your own story from someone else's shadow? Or faced a mystery that felt impossible to solve? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious.